Hey everyone, I'm Mariana and welcome to the reading portion of my April wrap-up. If you missed the movie and TV part, I will have it linked in the info box below along with everything else I talk about in this video, as always, and let's just get right into the books. So even though I had a bit of a slow start to the month, I actually still ended up reading 6 books and 1 graphic memoir in April. I can't show you all of them because a couple of them were audiobooks and I actually don't own physical copies, but the first book I finished was Pet Sematary by Stephen King, and guys, this novel took me by surprise. So far, this is the biggest surprise of the year for me, and I did not expect to love it as much as I did. I'll be honest, I wasn't even planning on reading this anytime soon, but so many of you have recommended this to me that I just had to see what all of the hype was about. My memories of Pet Sematary were from the movie adaptation. I think it's from the 80s. I saw it when I was way too young. I think I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. It scared the hell out of me, but it never was something I wanted to revisit. Well, imagine my surprise when I absolutely freaking loved this novel. I don't really think I need to tell you what this is about, and if you somehow don't know what Pet Sematary is about, then I definitely don't want to ruin the surprise, but in a nutshell, a family moves from Chicago to a small town in Maine, and there is a pet cemetery nearby, and as we're dealing with Stephen King, some strange things may or may not be happening at some point in this book. I think what surprised me the most about Pet Sematary is how emotional this novel ended up being and how personal it actually felt. I really felt like Stephen King drew from his personal experiences and from his personal fears, and that really worked for me. I can easily tell you that this is one of my favorite Stephen King novels that I've read so far, even though I haven't read that many, but this is definitely top 3 for me from Stephen King. I basically went into this expecting it to be scary, spooky, and a little bit cheesy, but it was none of these things. I found it to be mostly sad and very unsettling. It had some disturbing moments, but none of it ever felt like cheap scares or read as shock factor type of writing. So this was really excellent. I cannot recommend this enough. I think it is a very good novel. If you haven't read it, if you have the same reservations I had based on the 80s movie, just leave all of that behind. You don't need those thoughts and go into this book and read it. It is probably the least scary Stephen King novel that I've read so far, but that doesn't mean it is not excellent and it's not disturbing. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. There were some parts of it that dragged just a little bit, but I was so close to giving it 5 out of 5. And I cannot recommend the audiobook enough for you. There is an audiobook that recently came out narrated by Michael C. Hall, aka Dexter from the show Dexter, if you've seen it, and he is perfect as the narrator, just perfect. I basically now need Michael C. Hall to narrate as many Stephen King novels as possible. I will buy all of them on audiobook, and I actually will be getting this book in physical form to add to my collection because I need to own this. This book is way too good to not own. But yeah, the audiobook is excellent, and if any of you are not Audible members yet, I do have a 30-day trial for you with a free audiobook. I will leave all of the information down in the info box below, but you guys already know that I'm a huge fan of the service and I've been using them for years, so obviously if you can take advantage of that, you can just get Pet Sematary for free and enjoy the hell out of this audiobook. After that, I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, and this was not the experience I wanted it to be, unfortunately. I still maintain that Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors, and I haven't read anything by him that I actively disliked, but this is probably my least favorite work of his, and you can definitely tell that this is his first standalone novel that he wrote. Maybe if I read it earlier before I read all of my favorite books by him, I would have enjoyed this more, but reading this as one of my last Gaiman novels that I have remaining unread, this didn't really impress me as much as I hoped it would. The idea behind this is fascinating. The main character, Richard, one day decides to help out this girl, and because of that ends up discovering there is such a thing as London Below, which is pretty much a parallel London that has all kinds of crazy things and magical people and magical occurrences. It is a really, really interesting world, and if you are familiar with Neil Gaiman's writing, you know he just lets his imagination run wild. There are assassins involved, there is a mystery element to this, there are some awesome, quirky secondary characters in this one, so this really sounds like it would be my kind of book. But it just wasn't. The pacing just wasn't there. The main character was really boring and frustrating. He was basically one of those bland and passive protagonists that I really dislike and that just kill a novel for me usually. I love great characters, and sadly Richard wasn't one of them. Also, it took me about a third of this book to actually get into it and not be wanting to put it down, which is way too long. I usually don't have that issue with Neil Gaiman, but this book, I was thinking maybe I'm gonna have to give up on it, but I did eventually get into it. It did get interesting, and things did find their way towards the end. However, I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. This just didn't work for me as well as I thought it would, and even though there are things that I liked about it, I can't really recommend this to anyone unless you just are on a mission to read all Neil Gaiman novels like I am. Otherwise, you can probably skip it. I don't really know what's going on here because I know there are so many people who just love this novel, and if you are one of them, please talk to me in the comments below and let me know why you love this so much. Maybe you've only read a couple Neil Gaiman books and this was your introduction to his writing. Maybe that's the trick, but this just didn't click for me. So after my unexpectedly emotional experience with Pet Sematary and my slightly disappointing and pretty drawn out experience with Neverwhere, I decided I needed something that was light, entertaining, fast-paced, nothing too complex. So I turned to young adult and I decided to give One of Us is Lying a try. Basically, I just needed an entertaining novel that was going to give my brain a bit of a break, and this was the perfect solution. This was a very solid young adult mystery. It's kind of a mix of Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars, and The Breakfast Club. We have a group of teenagers, 5 of them, who go into detention, and then one of them is clearly poisoned and dies, so the other 4 are under suspicion, and the whole novel is about investigating who did it. Now, you guys know I don't really read a lot of young adult fiction at this point. The writing isn't really for me, and this novel did have that kind of typical young adult writing style and drama and angst. Very simple with everything and very angsty, but it worked. I was looking to give my brain a break, and this was the perfect solution. I really enjoyed the mystery. I got into the drama. The twist, which you can expect there's going to be a twist, was something that also worked for me. I was pretty happy with this novel. It wasn't anything outstanding and amazing. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like that's a pretty fair rating for the quality of the book that this is. But if you're like me and you need a break, I will definitely say that this is something worth checking out. The main thing that you're going to need to get past here is that the writing is pretty plain and simplistic, and the police incompetence is just, it's a thing. The police are incompetent. It's part of the novel. Don't even bother trying to figure out why. But other than that, this was solid. Now, at this point, it was pretty much the end of the month, and what really kicked my reading into gear here is Dewey's 24-hour readathon. If you're not following me on Instagram, you may not know that I was doing that, but basically, I was trying to read as much as possible in 24 hours, and I ended up reading 3 books, which I think is pretty awesome. The first one that I finished here was The Gone World by Tom Sweterlich, which I got in my March Nocturnal Readers box, and I was really interested in the premise, and this did not disappoint me at all. This is kind of a complicated novel to explain, and I don't want to ruin it for you and accidentally spoil anything, but there are 2 things you need to be aware of here. First of all, this is a mystery about a missing girl. The lead character, Shannon, is trying to find what happened to her, if she's still alive, what is going on, and that mystery starts in 1997. However, this is also a science fiction novel because the way that she tries to solve the girl's disappearance is she travels into these possible futures to try to look for clues for what happened to the missing girl. And that's where the whole mind-bending situation begins, because there's also a bit of a problem because they have discovered that there is an event called Terminus in the future, which is basically the end of the world. And it's not like a soft apocalypse. This is a hardcore, everybody dies kind of apocalypse. So that's also a thing in this novel. And it is fascinating. If this kind of sci-fi time travel mystery premise sounds interesting to you, 100% pick this up. You will not regret it. I unfortunately have not seen anyone talk about this novel, and that is really, really sad because this novel deserves to be talked about. It is really good, and this would actually make a very interesting movie if they ever decided to adapt it. It may take a little bit of getting used to because this novel throws a lot at the reader from the very beginning, but it's the good kind of complex. You want a novel that is a mix of mystery and time travel and sci-fi to be complex. Otherwise, the author is not doing his job or her job. And this is just great, and it gets pretty dark. I'm not going to lie, it gets graphic and it gets dark, so be prepared for that as well. As soon as I finished it, I knew I really, really liked it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, but this was something that I felt I needed to process for a few days. I don't think there's anything particularly majorly wrong with this novel. It's just that certain parts are more interesting than others, and there are a few repetitive things in there, but in general, they're all very minor issues, and I would highly, highly recommend this if the premise sounds interesting to you. After that, I quickly realized that in order to not get stuck in the middle of this readathon, because the Gone World actually took me a little bit longer to finish than I wanted to, I needed something a bit more fun and a bit lighter, so I went for As You Wish, Inconceivable Tales from the Making of the Princess Bride. This is obviously nonfiction, and it is about the making of The Princess Bride from the perspective of the lead actor. And this was so entertaining to read. For anyone who is a fan of The Princess Bride, this is obviously a must read. There's also a lot there for anyone who's just a movie fan in general and wants to know what goes on behind the scenes. I think my favorite thing about this was how much of a positive and heartwarming experience this book was in general. You could really feel that the cast and crew bonded and felt like a big family. There are a lot of quotes from other cast members here and from the director and from a bunch of other people involved, and that was awesome. So this was a solid 4 out of 5 read for me. It obviously really made me want to rewatch the film, which I'm probably probably going to do within the next few days. And I have never read the novel either, the actual Princess Bride novel. So if you've read that, let me know in the comments below if I should read that as well. But yeah, this is great if you need to just read through something that is positive and heartwarming, and also a nice piece of nonfiction about behind the scenes of a movie set. Then back to darker topics. The last thing I read for the readathon was My Friend Dahmer, which is the graphic memoir by Durf Buck Durf, who actually knew Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. And so that's what this is about. To be fair, I actually finished this after the readathon ended. So the readathon for me ended at 7 a.m. on Sunday, and I finished this on Sunday afternoon, but I feel like this still counts because I read most of it on Saturday during the readathon, and you know what? This was a third book in a 24-hour period. Give me a break here. Basically, the deal with this graphic memoir is that the author is trying to make a point about nobody paying attention to this kid who was very clearly disturbed, and there were a lot of signs that there was something wrong with him, but the adults just for some reason didn't really do anything about it, didn't really inquire about what was going on. The author definitely believes that all of the horrible murders could have been prevented by just paying attention to this person who was very lonely and struggling. And I would say the author's argument here is pretty convincing. I found this book to be very fascinating and surprisingly sad. Now, I was concerned that this was going to try to make me feel bad for a serial killer or empathize with him, but none of that happened, thankfully. I don't think any of us want to empathize or sympathize with a serial killer. So if you're concerned about that, don't worry, that's not going to happen. If you read this, this is more of a psychological observation of this struggling teen who clearly had issues. The thing I want to point out though is that you should not skip the notes section at the very end. It actually gives a lot of insight into what happens that you don't really read about in the actual graphic memoir, and it gives a lot of the sources for the stories, because some of this you'll be reading and you'll be thinking, well, how did he even know that this happened? He was clearly not there. The notes section explains all of it, and like I said, gives a lot of insight, so do not skip that. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I gave a lot of 4 out of 5 stars this month, but that's how I felt because of the art. If I were to rate this just on the contents themselves, this would have been a 5 out of 5 read for me, but this is a graphic memoir, so the visuals are an important part of it, and the art just is not my thing. It wasn't for me. It is a very personal experience as far as the taste in comic book art goes, but for me, the art just didn't do it. And the last thing that I read in April, which was also my classic of the month, was A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. I am actually not the biggest fan of the Kubrick film, which I know is a controversial thing to say. I really appreciate the filmmaking aspects, but as far as the story and the characters and kind of the overall takeaway from that movie, I'm not a big fan at all. But I wanted to read this novel because I know that Kubrick adapted the US version that was printed for a while that did not include the last chapter. And I wanted to see if having the last chapter changes things, and it does. I can confidently say that I liked the novel a lot more than the movie. And if you don't know what this is about, this is pretty much a dystopian setting about a really shitty guy and his gang who just go around robbing people, beating people up, raping. They're not nice people. And eventually, the leader of this gang, Alex, the lead character, gets caught and gets re-educated, so to speak. I don't want to say more than that, because if you don't actually know what A Clockwork Orange is about and what the whole deal is, what's with the title, I don't want to ruin it for you. Two things about this that I found very curious. First of all, obviously, the slang. The slang in this book is everywhere. It is based on Russian words. A lot of it is just straight up Russian words typed out with English letters. So that made it pretty easy for me to read as someone who is a native Russian speaker. But I don't know how well this goes for people who are not bilingual, because there is a bit of a glossary at the end that kind of gives an explanation of what each of these slang words means. But turning to the glossary every sentence can get old pretty quickly. So let me know how that went for you if you've read this. It is very, very interesting, and I did really enjoy it. Just be aware of the slang. It is everywhere. The other thing is the whole situation with the last chapter. And don't worry, I'm not going to say what happens. I'm not going to spoil this for you. But there are criticisms as far as the last chapter coming out of nowhere. And I do believe that Kubrick actually agreed with those criticisms, which is why he adapted the American version of this novel that did not include the last chapter. And I can kind of tell why some people feel that way, because it does come a little bit out of nowhere. However, it really rounds out the story. And I think without the last chapter, it really changes kind of the message of this whole book, which I don't really like. And I would say that you should read the novel as the author intended it to be read. Could it have been done better? Could the last chapter have been less out of nowhere? Absolutely. That could have been done better. But omitting it entirely, I think, is a mistake and just changes the text too much. So those are my thoughts on A Clockwork Orange. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I believe I only gave the movie 2 out of 5 stars, something like that. I'll have to check my Letterboxd and see what I gave the movie, but I was just disgusted by the film. And this story works better in the book, but yeah. Be aware of the slang and be aware of the last chapter situation. So that's it for my April reading wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what did you think of them in the comments below. There are definitely things I would love to discuss with you guys. And also let me know what you have been reading lately, because that's always good. I would love more recommendations from you. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel, ring the notification bell so you can know when my videos come out, and I hope you're having an awesome day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.